Agreed.
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to Rachel and Anna and everyone else who made this possible. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and it seems like we all kind of do different things that are related to this. This film talked about so many interesting topics. I mean, you've got like the child labor, the gender issues. I was drawn to, I guess what I noticed first was the focus on urban growth, and in particular unsustainable urban growth. They kept having statistics pop up on the screen, but 60% of the area that's projected to be urban by the year 2030 has not yet been built. So it's a huge growth trend, and as we saw from the slums in Calcutta, the urban growth like that in most places tends to be it becomes urban, like slum sprawl rather than sustainable urban growth. And I think that's a really huge problem. You see issues like the lack of water availability to these communities. And I don't know, what my impression that I've got watching this was that, the urban infrastructure issues that we saw there are not just technical or financial. It's not just about getting the water there. They're largely social and political. And environmental as well. So I don't know, that was kind of the impression that I got from it. It was the first thing I saw. You guys might have a different...
So I come from the business of water, and water is definitely the passion in my family. We recently were able to go to Honduras and see firsthand the struggle that people have in being able to access clean water. Different from Honduras, Hondurans typically have access, but their access is unsafe, and so children are getting sick and they're dying. So it's a different perspective to see these poor families having to go such distances just to fetch the water. The water might not be safe and clean. But what struck me with the movie the most, similar to Anna, and then also to kind of parallel my trip to Honduras recently, is it really does start with children. And the children in Honduras wanted to be involved in the processes that we were putting in the homes. Everybody was gathered around. It was a community event to go and put in a water filter. They were so excited, and to see the children in India lobbying for something that everybody has a right to, which is safe and clean water, is just really amazing. And I completely agree with the beginning message when the gentleman who forms the school said it all starts with children. It absolutely does. So that was the biggest impression for me.
Well, I'll start with a question. How many folks here watch Indian movies? I'm just curious. We have a couple of fans. You've seen a few. So one of the things that struck me personally was how, I think Amyam is the name of the teacher, lawyer guy. And he was saying how, guys aren't supposed to dance, or it's sort of looked down on. And in just about every Indian movie I've seen out of Bollywood, guys are dancing their pants off. So it was kind of funny. I was really struck, and I wondered what it was about the dance that they were doing, or his involvement as a teacher that made it so, I don't know, controversial. So that was at a human level. I really enjoyed the film. I thought it did a good job laying out a very complex set of problems. I thought that wove together to tell a story that wasn't overly optimistic. Not everybody succeeded, but at the same time helped us dive deep into some of the challenges faced in a very, very, for me, different context. So I thought it worked really well in that regard. It wasn't. Did anybody see? What is the one about Born into Brothels, about the photography project? Which had a little bit more of that sort of savior aspect that can sometimes be a little tummy churning. So one of the things that I thought was a really important, two things. This is clearly a public health film, and water, is a clear vector for good public health. Two things. One is, as of this year, India is 3 years polio free. And so that work that's going on there has really been successful in India, and I think that's a takeaway that the film doesn't communicate perhaps as well as it could. And the second is that in the last 10 years, India's HIV/AIDS rate has dropped 50%. And a lot of that, I think, comes from these efforts to prolong marriage for girls. If you can get them to make that a choice, and they talked about cultivating agency in these young people, and if you can really cultivate that as a choice that they have ownership and control of, then you're promoting their health. And I thought that was really interesting. Delaying marriage, correct. Sorry, did I say prolong? Yeah, good catch. Right, well, that must be a slip on my part. Yeah. So those were a couple of things that I found really interesting. I'd be curious to hear from folks here too, what some of your takeaways were.
Well, I have some experience with India. I've been traveling there for 28 years.
Wow.
There's southeastern countries through both the United Nations as a volunteer working with NGOs. And so I've been in India now anywhere from 4 to 8 months in the past 28 years. I just returned 2 weeks ago, working in villages and really beginning to see the reality, both as a psychologist, an organizer, and a health practitioner, and working with the poorest of the poor, working with the rising middle class. It is beginning to rise. But it was a wonderful film, and it gives one some encouragement. But there's the other aspect of India, and I'm sure those of you who've been to developing countries see this. There is such an incredible level of corruption at the highest levels, and it goes right down to the lowest levels. And women are still being significantly abused. I've done a lot of work with women and children who are sexually abused from 3 years up, and the police do nothing about it. The politicians, the courts, the corruption is so rampant, it's incredible. But yet, even in spite of that, there are, like, volunteers like this man who was really helping with the children. There's little groups in different places. But my concern is that, and it's an old adage, that the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And this is happening, and we still have in India the arranged marriages. And people oftentimes say, oh, arranged marriages are much better than the romantic marriages in the West. Well, I mean, I have concerns about, quote, romantic marriages. But these arranged marriages are so destructive. And I say they're destructive because the women have no power. Women are, except where you see the children having some power, women are really powerless. And sadly, the middle class Indians who have some education, their whole thought and their whole goals are making money. And so we really have some major problems, and children clearly are so invaluable, because I've been working in villages, more so in impoverished villages, and I see what can happen if one person, an Indian who can really be inspired, can bring together 100, 200 people, or even 20 or 30 people. Right now in India, the education is guaranteed from a kid, from kindergarten to the 5th grade, guaranteed, except that the children, the families have to pay for uniforms and books. And you have over 50% of the poor not able to do that. So you have a high percentage of young Indians uneducated. And then by the time they're 12, 13, 14, they go into marriage, and it's just perpetual. And it is growing. By 2030, I don't know what's going to happen. But I mean, I'm excited to see these kinds of projects happening. And but I think that there's this other reality. So for me, I have what I call this love-hate relationship with India, and will continue to go back and do volunteer work there and in Nepal and Cambodia, is my awareness of the challenges, but to focus on how one can help small groups raise consciousness, but especially be supportive of young women. Not to say not to be supportive of young boys, but they have such advantages over the young women. Yeah. But it was really nice to see that there was some perspective that was brought out here about how what one man can do with a small group of people.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how you the books and uniforms issue is prevalent all over the developing world. That's what keeps a lot of kids out of school. But the other thing is, a lot of these kids were, obviously working because their parents needed the income as well. So you get into child labor too, and trying to combat that or to at least eradicate the worst forms of it is a really difficult predicament, because a lot of those parents that they interviewed want the best for their children, but they just can't sustain the family. So I thought one thing that was inspiring was, you see the one part where the girl is being tutored on site, on the site where they're building the whatever they were building
the
there, the apartment building, the brickyard, which is was really wonderful to see, because I think that's one of the solutions to these problems, is trying to find ways to, or it's going to be really difficult to eradicate child labor completely, but to at least eradicate the worst forms for it, and to also find the ability to educate kids is most important. And the other thing is that goes along with that is that the gender discrepancies that you're talking about, a lot of times if a family has sons and daughters, they'll send the sons to school rather than the daughters, and a lot of the girls have to stay home and help take care of the house, fetch the water. When I was, I spent some time living in Liberia working at an NGO there, and we had at the NGO one of the only clean water taps in the town, the wells in the town. And you would see the kids coming all day, but it was all girls. It was mostly girls that would be coming to fetch water, and either the boys would be in school or doing something else. But that's one of the big reasons too, is if families are going to send someone to school, they're going to send their sons to school, because they know that their daughters will just get married off at 14. I don't know if anyone's heard of the girl effect, but it was I don't remember what the NGO that does that, but it's this whole rationale is if you can get to a girl at, I think it's 12 or 14 years old, and you can get that one girl, keep her from being married and put her into school, and then it goes off onto all the statistics that it affects the AIDS and HIV rate, teen pregnancies, complications from pregnancy, domestic violence, goes into all the health and political and social factors that are affected by keeping that one girl out of school or in school and preventing her from getting married.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, your point about the books and the uniforms. I've tracked for a while. Are folks familiar with the term microfinance? So maybe we've all made loans somewhere or helped someone out in the process. Studies have shown that many of those loans are made to pay for books and uniforms and things like this, not necessarily, the mercantile or productive ways that we'd like to see, and it's a real challenge for the urban poor to, I think, access education. Vandana Shiva, when as Rachel had mentioned, a trip I took with some students to the World Social Forum, and an Indian activist, Vandana Shiva, who you might know, had talked about the challenges of access to clean water, right? When you have Coca-Cola going in there and discharging certain amounts of water to produce their products, leaving very little for the women to do their work. And she had said, 90% of the women of the world manage the water, in communities. Right. And it really sort of struck me, and I think some of the young people, about that critical role women play as water stewards. And to see it in the slums, where now it becomes a political asset to be managed, and that goes to perhaps the more male institutions, the political processes and things where it's interesting to see that sort of drawing of power away from a very traditional and important role. Something else that I learned was that India has one NGO for every 400 people. So as much as there's corruption, there is this proliferation and flowering of institutions dedicated to helping, and yet, where's it going? How do we make them productive?
They're very open for volunteers, and even if you aren't a member of an NGO, I meet thousands over the 28 years of young people from Europe, some from the United States, but not as many, mostly from Europe, South America, who go there and they work for orphanages, and they work with NGOs part-time, or they work for other projects. And it's wonderful to see that there's an increasing number of young people and older people retired who go there, as I have in the past 28 years.
Yeah. And I should clarify, these are domestic NGOs too, not the international ones, because I think there were, up until some point, some laws on the books about limiting the access of foreign NGOs to work in India. They wanted to cultivate, I think, an infrastructure there.
Well, that's true. The majority that I know about are domestic, although some are international,
Yeah.
because I was involved in a couple of them.
Yeah.
I don't know quite where to begin because I'm not sure what I saw and I'm not sure what's going on. So I'll just try to describe it briefly and then ask you a couple questions about it. I'm kind of curious about the idea of optimistic revolutionary. And I'm looking at this film, and I happen to be reading a book called Inferno by Luz Arca, who was working for the democratic government in Chile. And a lot of the organizing is very similar, you know, where I'm looking at that, but I'm also looking at Bill Gates funding for the film. So I'm wondering, you know, if some of this is just being co-opted, I don't know. I'm asking, you know, where's the money behind the school? I probably would like to know more about that. I don't know if you have some approach. I also have been working for immigrant justice. They're looking for driver's license. And I'm in great admiration of them coming, some of them from Honduras, up here. It's a terrible journey on the chain of death. I also know from that experience, I looked online, and just this past week, a journalist has been threatened with death in his family. There are people saying they would kill them twice, which means a horrific death that they're planning for this journalist. So I'm not sure where to go to get some real solutions. I'm not sure what the problem is. I think I know. You know, the people in Honduras are $500 away from working as slaves. And so they come up here and they work for a little bit better than that. And I'm looking at U.S. foreign policy creating that. So that's a part of me saying, I think I understand that. But given that we have to change some of the things that we do to other people in the world, and what is to be done? I don't know. I'd love to hear your answers.
Wow. I mean, I spent a very small amount of time in Honduras, but I agree, it is an overwhelming place to be. It's an overwhelming issue, problem. I mean, the United States, Honduras, the way Hondurans view Americans, it's not safe, it's a dangerous place to be. Where I was in Honduras, I was in Trojes, Honduras, which is where they grow coffee. It's where they're growing tobacco. It's farms. My experience opposed to the film, the slums in the film look very different than what it looks like in Honduras. You're going up and over gigantic mountains. It takes you 2 hours to get to anywhere. Nobody has any access to anything, nothing. And they're purely living off the land, living in huts that are made out of clay, families of 6 to 8 people. But I have to say my experience there was so positive because they were so happy to see us. They were gracious. The one moment that, and my experiences are not as vast as the other panelists, but the experience that touched me the most was the eldest member of the community was a farmer. They're all farmers. And after we were there, he came up to me and hugged me and gave me a squash. And it's his bounty that feeds his whole family. So the experience that I had was a very positive one. It didn't feel like we were pushing things onto them. It felt very warm and welcoming. And the one thing I love about what Pure Water for the World does is the solutions that they present are sustainable solutions that they themselves manage. They have, similar to in the film where you have people that are kind of the advocates for the community, they have that as well within their villages. That they call them community agents. A lot of times they're women. So the point Lars brought up about the women sort of being the caretakers of the water and the people that sort of are, managing that for the community happens there as well. So it's a very interesting place to be. I'm not sure if I answered your question. I don't know if I can answer your question.
I'm not sure I can answer my question.
Yeah, it's all I can honestly say is it's very overwhelming for me. It's overwhelming to see films like this, to hear the things that Lars and Anna are saying. My experience was very minute in perspective of people's lives, but it was very life-changing and very impactful for me. And I hope to do more of it. And I guess if we can have more people in the world, such as yourself, that are willing to go out there and put themselves out there and make change, then that's the world that I want to live in. Yeah.
I see you writing. I know you're thinking of something.
I'm taking all kinds of notes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to get back to the whole co-optation idea, I mean, I view it a little differently. I mean, I think the world of sort of international development, it is a food chain, it is a food cycle, and it moves sort of really slowly. And I remember reading about a guy named Augusto Boal, I believe he was from Brazil, who developed something called sort of theater of the oppressed. And the whole idea there was to engage adults in teaching each other about problems through theater, and then building movements to change and solve those problems based on that mobilization. Fast forward 30 years to today, where you do have actors like Bill Gates and others who actually, I believe, do a very good job on the ground. One of the most effective aid agencies in the world is the Gates Foundation. And there are ideas of social and behavioral marketing that are out there, in order to sort of get somebody to adopt a new approach to good health. You've got to entertain them, hook them emotionally, get them to adopt a behavior that's not built into their current sort of habits and lifestyles, right? So I think there's a theoretical link there that I would say is different from co-optation, if I understood the question correctly. I don't know. And it's learning. What folks are doing is they're learning how to be more effective and more relevant, because our times change, our technologies change. I was actually really surprised to see that the cell phone wasn't, a tool for organizing and getting people involved.
It is in Honduras, in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a very powerful tool, and that's unlocked all kinds of mapping strategies, to map assets, as well as collecting statistical data from users out there. So it was interesting to see where the gaps were in this. For example, in that mapping effort that they did. But these are all tools that, writ large today, this group of people called social entrepreneurs, which is what I think Amyam really represents, this idea of someone who, puts aside a career, maybe not, maybe we don't have careers, but you identify a need in your community and you sort of use market strategies. I don't know if any of these people paid to be in his programs or things like that. Oftentimes you do develop those kinds of resources, just like with Grameen. But individuals as change agents, working small, working hyper-local to solve a problem, then through viral marketing, what works grows, There are resources out there to take a pinpoint success in one slum and then try and transfer it to another. And that's one of the ways that aid organizations, I think, are working a little differently, is learning from their partners on the ground what works. And often it is theater-driven, or it looks like something we've seen somewhere else.
That's pretty much the model that Pure Water uses. It's pretty much identical to that. It's integrated into their life. It's not. It doesn't feel, and I don't know a ton about NGOs, but it doesn't feel like they're coming in and taking over. It's locally driven. There's a ton of education that goes into it. I mean, that little boy running through the street saying, "Get your polio vaccines." That's what they're doing. The same exact thing. We're having a deworming clinic on this day, so bring everybody, and they do. They congregate, and it's very community oriented. The other thing is similar to what you were saying, within the community that they're putting water filters in, every single person within the community has to get a water filter. So the community agent's responsibility is to convince every single household in this community to do it. So the community agent has to buy into the process, and then they have to sell that process to all of the different people within the village. And then they're responsible for giving $7 US in as their kind of buy-in. It gives value. It's a new appliance to them, and they want to treat it with respect and understand it and understand what it's doing for them and their family. So it's basically what you're, I think what you're saying.
I think you guys also really hit the nail on the head when you talked about these locally driven projects and goals, because I mean, you read these development stories all the time where, you know, aid organizations, Western organizations are going into these communities and saying, oh, you don't have water, we'll build the water tap here, and no one goes to it. And you walk away and it's not upkept, and there's no local ownership of it, so people, you know, let it just fall to pieces, or nobody uses it and they can't figure out why, and it's because the water pressure isn't enough so that people are actually waiting in line for their water longer than they were walking to the water source in the first place. So I mean, I think that the going to the community and working with people locally to first see what their real needs are, and second, to drive the process locally, no matter what issue you're touching upon, whether it be like health and sanitation or women's empowerment, or, you know, any sort of issue. I think that you need to go directly to the people and have them run the process. So I think the best organizations build capacity, so they're not channeling money in. And I mean, we all know that you can give a man a fish, you can teach a man to fish. Adage, but it's like that. I think some of the best organizations are building capacity and opening opportunity, but also working with the community on the project themselves. I don't know if Amlan or any of the kids he was working with, I don't know if that was a UNICEF sponsored project or if he works for UNICEF, but I kept seeing the UNICEF buttons on all the kids while they were walking around, and I assumed that the UNICEF probably paid for the polio vaccinations or had the like clinics set up, and then they said they, you know, recruited a bunch of kids and told them to kind of drive it locally, and so I think that it probably had more impact coming from members of the community going around and being these change agents rather than, you know, a bunch of Western Americans walking around and trying to get people to get their kids polio vaccinated.
That's a key concept you're sharing, because most of the NGOs that I was associated with, where we were really trying to bring together the local people through community organizing, have them become empowered. And when I did become associated with NGOs that were really trying to impose their views and values, one of my roles and responsibilities, because I was considered a bit radical, was to say that's not the way to go. And there were times they listened, and there were other times they thanked me for coming, but they no longer had me. They had no longer had interest in my being there. But that's absolutely so critical, and that's why there has been major problems in terms of NGOs and the ones that are being imposed on the people versus the ones that come there, but really with the intention of helping to have the local communities become empowered.
The other thing to add to that is follow-up. There's lots of NGOs, and you know, I specifically know about the water organizations that go and put in a filter or build the well, and then that's it, they walk away. And there's, you know, might be some education involved, but if it's not working properly, it's not doing anybody any good. And Pure Water for the World doesn't do that. Every filter that they install, which they've installed like 461,000 filters or something in Haiti and Honduras, is followed up on. It's similar actually to our business structure. We install a piece of equipment, and then we have a service that goes along with that, and it's the same structure, and it's helpful. You need to make sure that it's working. They GPS locate every single filter they put in. It's interesting.
I have a question. Is it fair to say that a lot of the infrastructure is left over from when the British left, and the mindset has been that, you know, in terms of the government mindset has been that we would like to do that ourselves, but we don't. We're waiting for the British to come back and take their broken stuff back with them. And I understand that like the sewage system and everything in India is left over from 100 years ago when the British left. Is that true?
I would hazard a vaguely educated guess, and you would know better actually. Why don't you respond before I give my half-baked response?
Well, to give you an example, I spent this past year being involved with the legal system as an advocate, mediator, and I was absolutely shocked beyond what I imagined I would be, because we hear about judicial corruption and lawyers and the judges and the police, that I was actually experiencing it completely. And although they have a justice legal system that's really coming out of the British system, and they have a parliament concept that's similar to a parliament concept that's in Britain. But I have to say that there's a major disconnect between India, present India, and the United Kingdom and Britain. In fact, to the level, at a really, like incredible political level, that where the English could always come, the British could come to India with almost no visa at all. Now, it's very difficult for, the British have to apply for a visa, they only get a short-term visa. And so what I see is a whole political system in India that, although originally influenced in some positive ways, both judicially and socially and educationally, but yet very much in terms of a class structure. As there's been a very major class structure in the United Kingdom from hundreds of years ago, you have that very heavily embedded into the Indian system, and I don't see any connection anymore where there's any relationship between the present Indian way of life and as it relates to the British. And the British have almost no influence even now in trying to bring about any changes. So if I'm responding to the question that you raised.
Well, I guess the question is, are there problems that are in India today? Are they left over from when the British left?
I would say that historically, there's no question that some of what we see today is still historically related to the hundreds of years, 100 plus years that the British were there. But I think that I would no longer say, oh, this is because of the British, because we're so many generations beyond when the British left. And so what you see now is it's like a major difference. So, but that's not to say that it's just like when the United States goes into a country. All the countries that were colonial powers, there's still some residue, if I can use that word, some residue of that being that having been a colonial power. But it's no longer having any real positive or negative impact. It's just simply, it's a historical reality that was a colonial power, and that the British were really even more than a colonial power in India.
Well, I guess
as the oldest guy in the room, I'd like to comment on some single experiences of mine. My concern is my first concern is, personally, I've had an awful lot of hard, frozen attitudes about things in the past, and I think that I like to see a lot of loosening up of ideas that are floating around now. When I was a kid in the 1920s, and when I was a kid, we went to the movies, and it wasn't like today. It was like today in the sense that they had the Pathé News, that some of you may know about, and you saw movies of current events before you went on to the main film. And at the time, and this is in the 20s, Mahatma Gandhi was right forefront. And he'd be sitting there before the cameras, he'd be sitting on the floor, he'd have his spinning wheel, I think it's called a chakar. He'd have his spinning wheel right there with him. He would, and then he was in a loincloth. And this was a way to grow up. in a way, as I look back at it, I think it's probably a kid. It was kind of an unusual experience to see the great leader in the world in a loincloth and so on. When nobody would talk about it probably at the time, they wouldn't be able to stand back. But Gandhi was, I've learned since, that Gandhi just didn't want to go into development. He didn't want to go into progress. He didn't want to go into the modern world. He didn't want industry in India, and he wanted to build on the customs already there. And I'm not arguing for this. We're in the mess we're in, but I think we're in the mess because Britain, in my reading of recent times, was that Britain was very selfishly looking to control the textile world and was sending their textiles over to India to put the Indians out of work and that sort of thing. But we can get into all these bitter things if we stay and get stuck there if we don't watch it. But so Gandhi wanted, and you can go on and on with this, because I think it's important maybe to look at the cause of some things. So Gandhi was suspicious of industrialization. He wanted people to be living in their own adobe houses. That was the way to go, to grow their own food, to weave their own clothing. And so he was doing the weaving, showing it with his spinning wheel when he was in the Pathé News. And now I'm finding out that this is so possibly, and it's my passion these days to find out how much it's so in Mexico with the Indian peoples, that there's also people are trying to sell them something they call a Bill of Goods, the Declaration of Human Rights, which is about possibly, I'm not going to say it is definitely, I think it's very possibly about creating markets for some of us people to sell our goods. And it's a big, big subject, and I would love to see much more talk about this kind of stuff. And there are good things going on too. There are good things going on like you're talking about, you know, the microloans and some of the things are just postponing dealing with, you know, the facts of the ground, I think. But that always happens. But so it happened. So we're in a mess now in the world, and we maybe we cover it over by calling it development, and we call it expression of human rights. And maybe it's right. Maybe there's an argument against it. Human rights are just a cover. It's just such a fascinating. You can't be depressed. It's such a fascinating conundrum. How do you live now in this world with superpowers, all kinds of superpowers, and we're part of one, and it's a wonderful world in a way, but and we may be some of the worst off of anybody in our distance from one another and our living our lonely lives. The people of Honduras, I know Central America a bit, I know the South a bit from sharecropper days, and I know teaching in Harlem, so I have some feeling for other kinds of ways of living. But I want to see a lot of conversation about what we're doing and how much we're falling into traps and what's good we're doing, but not hurrying to justify ourselves or whatever. And the library is a wonderful place for bringing about these conversations. I think it could be.
Well, you know, one of the questions you're asking about what we can do, I'm really impressed that the young woman in the middle with your family has water. So you have water. I mean, we hear and read about that over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, water is going to be the primary need for people, and that's where the cost is.
Right.
And so when I think about that only maybe less than 2% of the water in the world is even drinkable, and I know about the water problems in India and in many third world countries, as the movie was shown. And then we now know with the research with all this bottled water and plastic, I mean, the dangers that come from drinking, and yet we don't have a choice. When you're in developing countries, you have to drink water from plastic bottles.
Right, it's crazy, it is.
So I would be excited to hear about whether your company, your family's company, from what I understand now, is actually expanding to offer their skills in other countries. Could you share just something?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So we're a very small 10-person business. My father started the company in 1980. My younger brother and I are managing it. And we've been passionate about water for a very long time, since 1980. I started the program within our company where we were going to start donating to celebrate our 30th year of business. I decided rather than offer some fancy promotion, we would give back. And I sort of arbitrarily chose an organization called water.org. I didn't really identify with their mission. And then through word of mouth, I discovered Pure Water for the World, and I met with Carolyn, who's the executive director, and they're just down in Rutland. It's run out of Carolyn's home. It's very, I feel as, and I, again, don't know a ton about NGOs, but I feel for an NGO, they care about the people and making sure that they're providing a solution that is using natural resources, and it's something that's manageable by them, and it is saving lives. It's saving children's lives. And so when I met with her and I understood what they were doing, I wanted to not just give money, which we do. We give a portion of every sale we make, we give directly to Pure Water. But we wanted to go, and they do these mission trips, and so I said that we would go. And they go to Haiti and Honduras. We went to Honduras. And the technology that they're putting in these very remote villages it's biosand filtration. It's just using sand and rocks, essentially, and they're running mountain water, spring water through the sand, and it's creating a biolayer, and that's collecting the bacteria, and then it filters down through the sand and out through the rocks and into a collection device, and that's what they're drinking and cooking with. The technology that we do is far advanced to what they're doing. And we've offered our kind of expertise and our knowledge to help them with development of technology, but honestly what they have going for them right now is the simplicity of the technology, and there's no moving parts. It's a funnel with sand in it, and it's easy to maintain, it's easy for the locals to understand, and so I feel, to add to your point, which I agree with you, honestly. I think that it can get really confusing when you have a community such as the communities in Honduras who are perfectly happy people. They're very loving, they have wonderful families, they live off of the land, they don't know any different, really. I mean, I gave a little boy a pack of stickers when I was there, and he's like, what is this? I don't even know what this is. And so it's just, they're not giving them something that they don't understand and that they can't handle, and that's benefiting some corporation somewhere to build the mold and do, it's not like that. They're putting in a technology that's very understandable to them. And so I guess to answer your question, the involvement that we have really is just to provide support to them, both financially and then our time, and then coming here and doing things like this and advocating for them, what they're doing.
Does your family have a foundation that they created so that you can?
No, but we will donate to them through our website. You can donate, and it goes directly to Pure Water for the World. And Carolyn wanted to be here, honestly. She just came back from Honduras maybe 2 days ago, so she asked if I would come in their place, and I, of course, said yes.
Since it's getting late, I wondered if each of you could make some final remarks, and then we'll call it an end.
Sure, well, I'll start and I'll just respond to your question, Kenrick. No, I don't think quite unequivocally that it's not a legacy of English colonialism. I think modern India has moved well beyond that. There are no doubt going to be legacies. India's got some of the world's top engineers there, and I think what we're seeing is a wealth problem. We're seeing slums growing at a rate where you cannot deliver services. And this is why the mapping is such a great tool. When you map a place, then you know where to take your services, whether it's fire, health, water, you name it. So I think it's an engineering problem in the sense that, you know, where these slums exist, they're growing and outpacing the priorities of those who govern infrastructure and where they're deciding to put it in. It's a very domestic political power struggle. It's this question of the voiceless and how do they get access to the goods that we enjoy. That's my cut on it. You know, India's got about 4,000 cities, what they consider to be cities. 2,500 of them are slums. How do you monetize an infrastructure that's going to go to slums? You know, this is the conversation that I think all forward-thinking engineers, politicians, entrepreneurs are thinking about today. It's a very live conversation, I think.
Interesting. I guess I'll just close by saying this film was very educational for me. I don't know a lot about India. I do understand the problems that the world's facing and will probably be facing even greater when it comes to water. And I do feel like water is really the foundation for a lot of social issues, women's rights, education, public health. And, you know, as Vermonters, we're lucky. We have plenty of water, and it's safe. We have infrastructure to support safe water. We have the EPA that regulates our safe water to no end. So we really take for granted the work that goes in from digging a well, drilling a well, to turning on our tap. And for me, water is a very big issue. It's a passion of mine, and I'm just excited and honored that I'm able to be involved with an organization like Pure Water, because I really feel like what they're doing is making a huge difference.
I kind of also wanted to respond to your point and tie it into some of what we were talking about globalization, because I think you raised a really good point in that I happen to think that the scars of colonialism run very, very deep, and that I think that we see modern day colonialism, even though it's not that, but we see a lot of the poverty is not, you know, is caused because you have free trade where, you know, you have small potato or cassava farmers that are now competing with huge subsidized farming companies all over the world, and they just simply cannot compete. Or, you know, there's some infrastructure project or where we've created a market in a country where that's not natural there, it wasn't there before, and it's kind of pushed people in a different direction. For example, you look at like the textile industries in Bangladesh and India. You know, we found cheap labor there, and it's causing a lot of people to move to these cities. So why are we seeing urban sprawl and slums popping up there? A lot of those people were farmers that lived out in the country before. Like so I don't think that the water taps were, you know, left over from the British and they just, you know, didn't, not literally, but I think figuratively, like you see, we've caused different industries, and we've created contexts where people are now moving and into urban areas. So I think that's also creating this. But I think the globalization point's a good one. And how do we combat that? How do we make sure, you know, I'm sure we all read in the news that about the factory collapsing the other day. I mean, people are just out to make money because our standards are so low there. I mean, we'll pay people and children, you know, next to nothing, and not have any laws or, you know, anything about the human rights abuses that are going on. We don't regulate that. We don't regulate the infrastructure. So I don't know. It's a strange dynamic, and while it might not be as directly obvious as colonialism, I still think it is kind of a form of that, and that a lot of these countries are definitely suffering from implications and contexts that we impose on them. So with that being said, sorry, that's kind of a depressing note to leave it on, but I do think that I do think that going back to local empowerment and creating and building capacity there, building capacity for people to create their own I don't know, to have what they facilitate, or to talk about what they need, and for us to help them meet those needs, and to teach them to have the capacity to be able to carry this on when we're not there, you know, so.
I know.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say, I really liked it that they were teaching the children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should all teach our children.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.